Hey everybody, I wanted to do a little introduction to this video series because this video series basically covers my attempts at threading for the first time on the Vernon lathe and the process of making the lifting ring for the Mercury outboard motor. There's actually some parts here from the Mercury outboard, so obviously I'm well into this. And the outboard motor is successfully in the basement here for me to work on, sitting right over there hanging from the cherry picker. Anyways, so I was able to successfully eventually make that part, but it was kind of, I had quite a few mishaps along the way, and what ended up happening was today I was editing the video for the first installment on the threading debacle, as I called it. Which I think when it hits YouTube I'm going to call it How Not to Thread. Well, what ended up happening was I had edited all of the video for the first episode and inadvertently thought I had published it from iMovie and didn't. Inadvertently erased all the files, erased the whole thing. So what you see at the end of the last Mercury video that I posted, which is actually the Mercury outboard part 1, the Tower of Power, there's a just a quick clip showing that I'm setting up in the lathe. I've got this piece right here actually in the lathe, and I'm getting ready to bore it with this boring bar because the inside is not perfectly smooth. Well, come to find out, this is hardened. This is actually, it was actually a race or a cage for a ball bearing unit. A shaft ran through here, was supported by ball bearings on the inside on each end. There's actually a hardened steel groove inside there. So that was a real mistake. I tried turning this and ended up frying this boring bar. So you can see the tip there is pretty much cooked off. The good news is that boring bar was already it was a used boring bar I had with the stuff I had, and it had already been ground by somebody and modified, so you know, it wasn't a horrible loss. So the next bonehead move that you guys missed me doing was well, it wasn't so much a bonehead move. I actually tried to use this piece right here, and this is a part that I think came out of the actually I'm not sure where this came out of now. I thought at the time that it may have come out of the Detroit 353 motor that I scrapped out of the my old multi-hoe. For those of you who've been viewing for a while, I scrapped an old backhoe. And I thought maybe that's what this was, and then I faced this, and when I faced it initially I thought the chips looked kind of weird, and then I turned it, started turning it, and came to the conclusion that this is actually cast iron. At least I believe that's what it is, the way the chips were coming off, and just it's got this gray look to it. It's funny because that polished area right there fooled me into thinking that this was steel. And initially I was worried this was hardened too, but I ran a file over it and it cut pretty easily. Come to find out, pretty sure that's cast iron, gray cast iron. So that wasn't going to work. So then I ended up finding this piece here, and when we pick it up, the next video clip you're going to see, this is chucked in the lathe, and I'm actually starting to work on this. You can see I messed around with this quite a bit before I finally chucked this, so to speak, got rid of this thing. But one of the things I wanted to mention about this, when I was cutting in this area over here, there was a not so much the groove that's on here now. That was actually a test cut when I was fooling around with the thing, but there was a another groove on here, and when I was initially cutting over here, it was causing an intermittent cut situation, and I was doing it at a very low speed, And what I noticed was every time it came around, every time the cutter came around and caught that edge on that intermittent cut area, I could actually visibly see when I was editing, I could see that this piece was moving. And initially I thought, well, the part was loose in the chuck. Well, come to find out it wasn't. Come to find out it actually ended up being the whole chuck was moving up and down. So then I checked to make sure the chuck was on good, and of course it is. And what I could actually see is I could actually see in that little shoulder area right in front of the bearing, I could actually watch the oil in there, the oil film in there. I could actually watch it almost like it was breathing, coming in and out as it was doing that. So what I believe I've got going on here is I've got excessive play in my front spindle bearing. So even though I went through all the trouble of putting the bar in there and torquing on it and checking the free play and everything, it appears that either something has changed or it just was excessive to begin with. So I'm going to have to take off the front bearing cap and remove one or more shims on the front and back side to tighten up that tolerance on that front spindle bearing, because it's obviously, from what I saw, it must be excessive. All right, so at this point I'm going to turn it back over to Steve of the past, and we'll pick it up from here. You know, the more I think about it, the more I realize I don't even need to really turn this all the way down here. I've got, I think this, I ended up figuring out this was undersized, so I can just turn this down to the 1.5 inches and try making my threads on that. Alright, I just checked it with my micrometer after making a finish cut with fine feed, and I checked with the calipers first, and it was about 1 or 2 thousandths under with the calipers, so I decided to check it with a micrometer, and on 2 thousandths under 1.5 inches. I think I'll be able to work with that. Alright, I'm just about ready to take a stab at threading on the Vernon lathe for the first time. And done a couple of things. I've got the lathe in back gear, and I've got it in the slowest speed. I've set the quick change gearbox for 16 threads per inch, which according to the chart down here, that's 16 threads per inch right there. That means that this should be in number 2, which it is, and this should be in the third hole. This should be in the third hole over, which it is. So supposedly this is going to give me 16 threads per inch. And the other thing I've done is I've set up my tool, my cutter, and my tool post. So just like parting, in threading, it's critical that the tool post be square to the work. So just like I did with the parting blade, I use my 1, 2, 3 block up against here and up against this front face of the chuck and squared it up that way. In addition to that, to double check, I've got my little fishtail, and I took that, and all I got to do is run that. I'm going to move this over a little bit. I hold this up against the work, and then I run the cutter right into that little 60-degree notch, just like so. The other thing I have done is I have checked the center height of my threading tool, and I did that with the old scale pinched between the work and the work on the cutter tip, and just double check that it's actually okay. I'm still a hair high. Thought I had that correct. Guess not. Oh yeah, that's dead on right there. And so I'm going to lock this down. Okay, and I set my compound to 29.5 degrees. Okay, which is the proper setting from what I've read as far as the compound goes for threading. Okay, So let's see. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set my thread stop, and my thread stop is this bar right here. This part right here actually flips up and locks to this, and looks like it's too short, but all that is it's actually when it's not being used, pretty much stows away, so to speak, in this comes out like this. So let's see. So basically what this does is this stops the carriage from advancing in past a certain point. And you might be wondering, well, what's the purpose of that? And the reason for that is, as far as advancing the cutter to actually deepen the cut of the thread, that's all done here on the compound. Okay, through here. Follow me? All right, so this all happens through the compound. And the reason why we use the compound to advance the cutter is because since the compound is turned to 29.5 degree and we have a 60 degree cutting thread in there, effectively what we're doing is we're advancing the cutter at exactly the right angle so that the leading edge of one side of that cutting point is cutting. If we try to advance with the cross slide, the problem with that is the cross slide is going to send that V-shaped 60 degree cutting point in straight in, which is going to cause it to try and cut on both sides at the same time, and we don't want that. All right, so if that's the case, well, why not just set the why do I worry about the stop? Well, quite frankly, I worry about the stop because when I finish cutting the thread, I want to be able to back the cutter out. Then when the carriage comes, when we get the carriage back into starting position for the next pass, I want to be able to bring the carriage back in to the exact starting point as far as depth goes that I started the first pass with, and the second and the third and the fourth pass. But every time I start another pass, I'm going to advance the compound a little bit, and that's what's going to give me a little bit more of a cut each time I do it. All right? So I think I've got this theory down. Now it's just in practice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the cutter up until I'm just touching the workpiece. Okay? And I'm going to tighten my thread stop rod, and I'm going to set this little micrometer stop adjustment on this thing, okay, to right there. Well, I want to tighten this first. There we go, okay, and that. Okay, so now every time I come in with this carriage, I could stop right at that same spot. So if I bring this off way out over here, even if I bring it in until it stops, I'm literally right on where I want to be. All right, so now that takes care of that. So my next problem is my busted deal over here on my compound. Remember, I broke that handle a while back. Those of you who follow all my videos and see all of my mistakes. So I've actually literally got a pulley stuck on here as a makeshift handle. Well, that's all fine and dandy up until now, but now that I'm threading, I want this collar on here that shows the graduations. Alright, so until I get the hang of it, I'm going to, I've kind of notched a little groove right here. So I'm going to thread up to that point right there, and then I'm just going to shut the machine off.
and I'm going to leave the drive engaged, the feed engaged. I've got the feed lever here, okay? And, you know, if I was really crackerjack at this, I would be able to probably get this thing to come out to the end here, pull the cutter out of the cut with the carriage, and then with the cross feed, and slap this thing right into reverse, and have the cutter come back, bring this forward, advance the compound again, and slap it back into forward, and theoretically it should catch that thread every time. At least that's my understanding of how this is basically a rip-off of how like the Hendy lathe works, and the Hendys are known for this ability to do this threading this way, as opposed to a lathe where you need a either need a threading dial, and what you do is you wait till the threading dial comes around to a certain point, and you engage the drive right when it hits the thread, hits that point. Or if you have a lathe with forward and reverse, you can actually stop the lathe, reverse it, and it'll actually back up, and then bring it back in and go forward again. So I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody, but anyways, so we're gonna try and cut a thread.
As soon as I figure out where I put my safety glasses down.
So I've taken up my lost motion on my compound, and I'm just going to advance this in. See, that's 20. That looks like that's probably 10 thousandths right there. And get some oil. Cheating a little bit, disengaged the clutch and brought it up closer. I cut a little bit of a chamfer on the leading edge there, so it's not doing anything yet. There it goes. So I'm into my groove, back the carriage handle out, shut it off. Alright, now here's the critical part. If I had a threading dial on here and was doing it the typical way, I would, at this point, I would disengage the feed, run the carriage all the way back out here, and get ready to engage it when the threading dial came around to the proper location. But what I'm going to do is, instead, I'm going to bring this handle up. Before I do that, I'm going to switch the gearbox and go a little bit quicker, because that was painfully slow even for me. Taking such a light cut, I can barely see it through the oil. Okay, all I did was increase the speed of the spindle. So I'm actually still feeding this way. So now I'm going to change direction. And now, as Tom Petty said, the waiting is the hardest part. Alright, not sure why the camera shut off there, but I can already tell that I've spoiled this work. And I'm not sure why, but I'm not cutting threads. All it's doing is turning. In other words, all I'm doing is turning this piece. Okay, the moron's back. Battery died, so I had to recharge the battery. Figured out exactly what's wrong. I'm an idiot. Okay, so I totally forgot that for threading, you use this lever over here, which engages the half nut, which is used for threading. Okay, so you don't use the feed clutch, you use this lever here to engage the half nut. And because on this particular lathe, as with many lathes, the feed is a multiple of the threads per inch. When in my case here, it says the feed is 4 times the threads per inch. So when I was setting it to 16 threads per inch, but using the feed, that's 16 times 4 is 64, and I think that's 64 thousandths. I think is what that equates to. I'm not quite sure. But the point is, that's why the damn thing was moving so slowly. And so that's why it was basically, it was turning instead of cutting a thread. All right, so after the battery died, what I did was I cut off that section that I screwed up because it was undersized now, so I can't use that. So now I'm going to try and cut the thread on here. And I've got my cutoff tool in there right now, and I'm going to cut a groove right there so that I have a place to have the threading tool come into before I stop. So instead of trying to thread right up to a shoulder, which is kind of tricky, it's nice to cut a little relief for yourself. That's good enough. All right, the first 2 passes look good, and then on that last pass there was a bit of a delay before before it kicked in, and I think that actually caused it to screw up alignment, and I think I just cut off what threads I was actually able to make. Quick change gearbox lever just fell out of engagement. Darn it. In other words, my broken handle allowed this to just fall out. So much for keeping everything in sync anyways. Alright, we'll have to try this again. Alright, I'm ready to give it another shot as far as threading goes. Now I'm going to have to turn a new piece because I pretty much trashed this in my attempt the other day. And now I know that this is undersized. So basically what I figured out, or I think I figured out, well, obviously the problem was that I wasn't using the half nut. But then I also ran into a problem when I was using the direction reverse lever there. At one point there was a slight hesitation before it started reversing direction. And I think what happened is inside, underneath the headstock there, where the dog and the pawl, I think they call it a pawl carrier or whatever, those components there, I think they didn't quite engage, and they missed and turned a little bit, and the lugs that engage, it like engaged the very next set of lugs, which would cause a bit of a misalignment. So I think that's what happened. So I think if I do this without changing the lever while the lathe is running, I think what I got to do is I got to, wait until I get down to this point, and then shut the motor off, then engage my lever, which should cause that carrier to slide over and engage the other gear, and then continue. I think that'll work. At least I hope. So, since this piece is ruined anyways, I figure the prudent thing to do would be to actually use this as a practice piece. I think I had already determined that this was already under. Well, actually, this little section right here is still good. Well, actually, I could turn this. All right, so what I think I'll do is I'll practice over here. I'll clean this up, and then I'll practice the threads on this undersized area, and then I'll try and do it here. So for starters, let me take this off and put my carbide cutter back on there.